Hey, New Life Church, what is up? I don't think that we've ever actually met. My name is Kevin McNeil, and I am a church planter. I'm planting in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Right now, I am doing a residency. I'm in Jacksonville, North Carolina with Roger Burns. He planted Restore Church here in Jacksonville 3 years ago, and they are sending us to plant a church in Goldsboro. Currently, I am in the cohort for Passion for Planting, and Roger was in that same cohort 4 years ago. So it was really, really cool to be here with you via video and share some thoughts with you. I remember as a kid, I absolutely loved Legos, okay? Legos were the greatest thing. It was like the original Minecraft, you know what I'm talking about? Legos were awesome, and I would come up with some pretty, sweet designs. I remember one time I built this big house. I remember one time I built a big Batmobile. I was pretty good, and I could do it all day long. Like, my mom had to stop me from playing Legos all day. And so I remember one time I was at my grandma's house, and all of the adults were hanging out, and I brought my big box of Legos, and man, I stacked them up, and I built this huge farm, and I had this big barn, and this big house, and I was building cars and trees, and everything was going great, man. Like, it was the greatest Lego design of all time. I probably spent an hour on that sucker, like so much time. I was so excited to show people, because you know, when you're a kid and you're working on Legos, that's what you got to do. You got to build up your creation, and then you got to go run to the adults and say, hey, come and look at what I've done. And so I was almost done. I was so excited, and sure enough, my uncle walked by, and I was just a little kid, and he wasn't paying attention. And to be fair, I was in the middle of the hallway, but his foot stepped on all of my buildings. I mean, the guy wore like a size 15 shoe. And so just like that, he destroyed all of my work. And so what do as a kid? I cry. Like, that's exactly what I did. I was devastated. And so I was super upset with my uncle. I thought he did it on purpose. And I was like, oh, why would you do that? Because I put so much hard work and so much energy and effort into that, only for it to just like that, be gone. And it was devastating. It was so incredibly hard to lose all of that. And unless you've been living under a rock for the past month, I feel like that's exactly what has happened with this whole coronavirus thing. I mean, people have been working hard. Everything has been going on, business as usual. People have been making plans, and then just like that, all their plans are gone. And people have been saving up money, or like, for example, my wife just landed a great job, and just like that, all the jobs are gone. And, you've been saving up money, and just like that, all the money's gone. And bills are still due. And it could be a little overwhelming. Like, it can be a little scary. It can make you sad. It can make you incredibly worried. And, if you let it eat you enough, man, it will really, really get under skin. It will really, really get to you. And I was thinking about this, and my wife and I were actually talking last night about this, and we were talking about how we have this weird peace about this entire situation. And I wanted to share with you this morning a little bit about where that peace comes from. I was actually reading Psalms chapter 49, and it talked about this, and I was like, wow, this is where the peace comes from. Check this out. It says in verse 1, and Psalms 49 is a pretty long chapter, and in order to make this video 10 minutes or less, I will try to reduce, so I'll skip over some verses. You can go ahead and read the whole thing. I would encourage you to. But it says, starting in verse 1, it says, listen to this, all you people. Pay attention, everyone in the world. Okay, high and low, rich and poor, listen to what I'm about to say. That's what he says. And then he says in verse 5, he says, why should I fear when trouble comes my way? When enemies surround me, they trust in their wealth and they boast of their great riches. Yet they cannot redeem themselves from death by paying a ransom to God. Redemption does not come so easily, for no one can ever pay enough to live forever and never see the grave. He says this in verse 10. He says, those who are wise must finally die, just like the foolish and the senseless, leaving all their wealth behind. The grave is their eternal home, where they will stay forever. They may name their estates after themselves, but their fame will not last. They will die just like all the animals. This is the fate of fools, though they are remembered as being wise. And so he goes through and he talks about how people on this earth, man, they have all this money and they have all this wealth and they make a name for themselves. But at the end of the day, death is the fate of us all. He says everybody, young and old, rich and poor, sick, not sick, we are all going to end up at this grave eventually. Some get there before others, but eventually this is the final place that everyone arrives to. And then he says this, check this out. In verse 15, he says something, and as I read it today, it literally made my hair stand up. He says, but as for me, God will redeem my life. He will snatch me from the power of the grave. So don't be dismayed when the wicked grow rich and their homes become ever splendid. When they die, they will take nothing with them. Their wealth will not follow them into the grave. And then he says, in this life, they consider themselves fortunate and are applauded for their success. But they will die like all before them, and they will never again see the light of day. People who boast in their wealth don't understand they will die just like all the animals. So I'll read that passage, and some of you're thinking to yourself, man, what a morbid, dark passage to share in such a time like this. Shouldn't we be reading passages that, like, oh, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want? Shouldn't we be reading passages that bring us peace and bring us comfort? And that's exactly what this passage doesn't do. This passage is a real reminder that, hey, this whole coronavirus, this whole, sick and death and all that stuff, man, it's a reminder of reality. Like, this is really happening, and everyone is going to find themselves at the grave eventually. And this writer of Psalms, he says, listen, I'm not worried because God is going to snatch me from this grave. He says, you guys are trusting in your riches and you're boasting in your accomplishments and you guys have made this great name for you, but eventually you're going to die and that's not going to last. But he says, I find my hope in God. I find my hope in Jesus, and Jesus is going to be able to make me last. I'm going to be pulled from the grave. I'm going to spend eternity worshiping God. But all of your stuff, man, it's going to go to someone else. Just like Jesus says in Matthew, he says all that stuff's going to rot away. Moths are going to eat it. Rust is going to destroy it. But this writer of Psalms, man, he says, listen, I'm not worried and I have a peace because I trust in God. And I think, honestly, if this coronavirus has shown us anything, it's going to show us that the only thing worth trusting in our lives is God. And it's putting our faith, putting our hope in Jesus. Because as we found, a lot of us have great jobs, but just like that, our jobs went away. A lot of us may have great money or a great retirement and all that stuff, but just like that, it went away. And so everything that we put our hope in this life, it's eventually not going to be here because we're going to die and we're not going to take it with us. But the only thing worth really putting our hope in is Jesus. And it's really putting our hope and our salvation and our trust in God. And so what does that mean for us? Like, what does this have to do with our real life? How can we really put this in? Well, first I would just challenge you and say, what have you put your hope in? Because if you haven't put your hope in God, if you haven't put your trust in Jesus, maybe that's what you need to do today. Like, maybe this whole thing that's been happening has shown you how everything else that you've been trying in life, it just comes and goes just like that. But Jesus, he stays the same yesterday, today, and forever. And one day when everyone dies, Jesus is going to be able to pull us from the grave, just like the writer of Psalms 49 says. He says, God is going to be able to snatch me from the grave. I'm still going to have life when everyone else dies. And so I would challenge you, man, if you don't know Jesus, get to know him today. Talk to somebody about him today. Talk to me. Message me. Find me on Facebook. I would love to tell you about who Jesus is and why I follow him and why I trust him. The second thing I would say is keep living out your mission, In a world where everything's going crazy, I mean, he says, hey, don't even worry about people that have great homes and they have all this money. He says, don't worry about what other people are doing. And I would challenge you, don't worry that this world is going crazy. Don't worry that everybody's losing their mind and going bonkers. It is our job as disciples to make more disciples. And so in this time and in this season where everything's just going nuts, I would challenge you, man, just keep living out your mission. Keep finding people and keep telling them about Jesus. And live out your days just like you would any other day. And tell people about who you serve and why you serve them. And then number 3, I would challenge you this. I would challenge you to put on your eternal lenses. And what I mean by that is focus on the eternal picture here. Don't focus on the here and the now and the coronavirus and everything that's happening. Instead, focus on the eternal perspective. Like, we're so worried about, what tomorrow is going to bring. But what about 60 years from now when we pass away? What is our eternity going to look like? Like, we get so ready for retirement, but none of us get ready for eternity. And so I would say, look at this from an eternal perspective and stop worrying about it so much. A great way to ask the question is this. I'm sorry, I worded that wrong. A better question, instead of saying, oh man, what's going to happen with this whole coronavirus, the better question to ask is, what is God up to right now? Because he knows that this is happening, and he knows that things are going crazy. How is he going to use this to reach lost people? How is he going to use this to further his church and to further his kingdom? Because all throughout the Bible, we read of crazy events happening, and God always uses them and always uses them for good. And so that's what I would ask. If you look at this from an eternal perspective with the eternal lenses on, man, you're not asking, oh man, what's going to happen tomorrow? You're asking, how is God going to use this to reach people? What is the good that God is going to do with this? And so that's a little bit of where my peace comes from. I'm not worried about tomorrow because my hope is in Jesus. And Jesus holds tomorrow. Jesus controls tomorrow. He is in control of everything. So why, kind of like the writer of Psalms says, Psalms 49, he says, why should I fear when trouble comes my way? Because, ultimately, my fate is secure. My eternity is totally fine. And no one, yeah, sure, people can mess with your 401k, but people can't mess with my eternity. And when Jesus comes back, I don't need to be worried about that. When I die, I don't need to be worried about that because I'm going to be pulled from the grave. And I hope that I have been able to share a little bit of that peace with you. Again, if you don't have that peace, I would love to talk to you about it. I'm sure anyone in New Life would love to talk to you about it. But I hope that I've been able to encourage you, and I hope that you have a great day and a great week and a great month. And I look forward to meeting you one day in person. You guys have a good one.